good afternoon. It's Thursday the 26th of March and we're going live. Hurrah, hurrah. How is everyone today? What a beautiful day. I'm afraid I've been relegated to my bedroom today because my wonderful housemate is doing lots of very important work downstairs and she's on some conference calls. So I'm kind of propped up in my bedroom. If this whole thing falls apart, my iPad falls over, well, it's a strong possibility, put it that way. Hope you're all well today. Another gorgeous day out there. I seem to be permanently living with my sunglasses on my head at the minute. Fantastic. Nice to see you all. I hope you have... Oh, Mitchell's mowed the lawn. Busy stuff today, Mitchell. I mean, it's a good day for it, right? I'm waiting for about 1.5 tons of pebbles to be delivered from my back garden, but no sign at the minute. I'm really hoping they don't turn up in the next 15 minutes or so. All right. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's one with Mary Seacole. Well, not with Mary Seacole, about Mary Seacole. She was... I think it's supposed to be my favourite one I've done so far. I just really loved her. And we have another fantastic talk today, and we're going to be introducing my colleague shortly, my lovely colleague Laura Adams, who's going to be coming on to talk about the Great Fire of London. And just firstly, before we do anything, just want to mention... I've spent the last couple of days updating my website. I was up till 1 o'clock last night doing stuff on it. I have updated all the links I've been mentioning the last few days. Sorry it's taken a while. It was a bit of an onerous task. It's got loads of stuff on there now, all the different things. There's some fun stuff, some videos. I've also made a little... stamps so that you can see which ones in particular are great for kids, because I know there's a lot of people out there trying to entertain the little ones, so there are some things on there for kids, and also there's a support global tea break on there as well. Thank you so much to everyone who has sent some donations so far. I honestly, I'm really touched beyond belief, so thank you so much. It's really sweet. What's the URL for global tea breaks? If you go to my website, alexlacey.com, you'll see on the front page there's a link to follow for global tea breaks. Everything is on there. We've got the menu of what's coming up. I've just put the new menu up for the next few days up there. You've got all the links. You've got everything you could possibly want up there. So please take a look, because it's taken me ages. Right, I'm going to invite my fabulous friend Laura, who is on here somewhere. Here we go. Welcome, Laura, fellow Blue Badge Guide. So if you can accept, Laura, otherwise this ain't going to go very well. Yay! Hello! Lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm good. I've got my cup of tea.
Oh, yeah, lovely. Oh, yes, I forgot to do a cup for everyone who... Yes. I think we're on the last cup now in my rotation. It's just a rather nice black and white number. So, I've invited Laura to come today and talk about the Great Fire of London. And in particular, the reason we're doing this so early on in our little sort of lockdown session is because I had loads of inquiries for the Great Fire of London. And in particular from my friend Alex's son, Linus, who's got very excited every time I've started to talk even remotely near the Great Fire of London. So we're going to do it in 2 days because there's a lot to talk about, isn't there? There's a lot to say. So for those of you who don't know much about the Great Fire of London, I'm sure there's a lot of people who do, and maybe some kids out there who are studying it. We're going all the way back, cast your minds back, if you will, to 1666. And it was a really huge deal for London, this Great Fire of London. In fact, Laura does do, I'll mention a bit later on, she does do some walks on the Great Fire, particularly for Key Stage 1 groups, so we'll tell you a bit more about where you can find information about that. But it's a really big deal for London because it is basically a hugely catastrophic event, isn't it?
It's an absolute catastrophe, but I think what's wonderful about this story is it's a story of hope, it's a story of resilience, and we are going to do this in 2 parts, Alex has told me. So we're going to go up to day 3 of the fire, and then the hope and the happy bit of the story, the rebuilding of London, will be on Saturday, I think.
On Saturday, yes. We're going to do Fridays on foot tomorrow, so we're still allowed to go out for a walk, so I'm going to do my walk in the afternoon and take you around my area, but then we'll come back with Laura on Saturday to finish off the story. So there we go. Yeah, so tell us, kind of start us out. How did the whole thing start out? What was the deal?
Well, let's just talk for a minute about London before the Great Fire. So we have to cast our minds back. We have a fabulous group of guides who do these fireworks, and we tend to time travel. I certainly time travel. We travel back in time to 1666. So we're going to travel back. We're looking at the streets. These are, well, it's a city that's been absolutely devastated. The previous year, they've had a terrible, terrible outbreak of plague. One in 5 have died in that outbreak. And London is just about picking itself up again and moving on. But this is a city of timber-framed houses. These are wooden houses, very narrow streets. They are jettied houses, they're called, which means they go up and then they come out at the top, which means they're so narrow sometimes you can actually shake hands over the street. It's a very noisy city. There's lots and lots going on. There's lots of animals in the street. It's a very smelly city, you know.
Yeah, it's not the cleanest, is it?
Not the cleanest, you know, people chucking the contents of their chamber pots out of the window and all sorts. So this is the city that we have, and we've had a very, very hot, dry summer. So of course the timber is all very dry, and
The stink would be impressive as well, wouldn't it?
the stink would be really impressive, absolutely. The manure, the human waste, all sorts.
And actually, Laura, I should say at this point, you sent me a fantastic link earlier today, which is oh my goodness, it's so good. It's, well, actually, do you want to explain what it was about?
Well, it is, any of you can go to the link after this.
I put it on my links in my website.
It's on Alex's links, and it is a 3-minute video of the streets of London in 1666 pre-fire.
It's
and
fantastic.
I really recommend it. It's amazing.
It's so atmospheric.
Sense of what the old city was like. So do that. They've done it brilliantly. So we have this very, very strong east wind blowing. Now, what we do have to remember is that London is not new to fire, you know, as I'm sure many of us know that, you know, lots and lots of fires, but generally the fires were put out very quickly. But what happens this time is it's kind of a perfect storm, if you like. So we go to Pudding Lane. Now, just a bit about Pudding Lane. Pudding Lane makes it sound like it's a lane full of puddings, treacle tarts, and chocolate brownies. And
No such luck. No
such luck. Pudding was very, very different. Pudding was offal, basically. There was a thing called a hog scalding house in Pudding Lane, and this was where they would scald the skin of the pigs after slaughter, which would help get the hair off. And in that process, they would chuck all the kind of anything that was left over, all the offal and stuff, out into the streets, and it would all be sort of brushed down to the river. So this would have been a stinky, smelly, horrible.
Sounds delightful.
Lovely. There would have been lots of open fires, and of course, Mr. Fariner, the baker, Mr. Fariner, who lives in Pudding Lane, he has his bakery. Now, he had a special job. He wasn't just a baker. He wasn't particularly baking bread at this time. He had a commission to bake ship's biscuits for the Navy. And a ship's biscuit, I've actually got my lovely guiding friend Sarah Boville actually made.
She's here today, she might be.
Yes, I think
Now
she.
I mean, it's interesting because ship's biscuits, you sort of think, when everyone says a bakery, everyone assumes it's bread, it's loaves, it's cake, that kind of thing. And ship's biscuits are not that at all. They're pretty... Oh, there we go, Sarah Boville, she is watching.
She's watching.
They're pretty... They're pretty tough to stomach, aren't they? They're not the nicest of things. Sorry, Sarah. I mean, yours are fabulous.
I'm not fabulous, let me tell you. Listen to this. That's the sound these ship's biscuits make. They were flour, water and salt, and they were made for the Navy. Obviously, they had to have food to keep them going over many, many months when they were at sea. And they were not pleasant. You had to sort of dunk them in your tea or whatever.
Your tea?
Soften them up, your tea, exactly. They did all sorts of things, different things with them. They would crumble them, burn it, and then crumble it into some water, make a sort of a coffee with them. But these would get infested with weevils, etc. And they would have to brush off the weevils to eat them. And in fact, at times, I think they couldn't be bothered to do that. So they got a bit of extra
I mean, it's protein, yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, so here we are, Pudding Lane. He's made his ship's biscuits for the day, and he's put out his fire, and he's gone to bed. And in his house are living Teague, his servant, Hannah, his daughter, and a maidservant. And they go to bed, and about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, Teague is woken up with the smell of smoke, and he goes down, and the bakery is it's on fire. Now, it's caught fire very, very quickly. We don't exactly know why. Probably an ember that's fallen on something. We're not sure. But very quickly, the whole bakery is alight. So they can't get out. So they have to escape out the window, basically, and jump over the roofs.
We should say as well that fires weren't lit all night long, were they? You had a time at the end of the day, the curfew, which comes from actually a French word meaning couvre-feu, meaning to cover your fire. So there'd be a bell, wouldn't there, at about 5 o'clock? Is that right?
Something like that, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Alex. Yes, and that would be time to put out your fire. And Fariner said that his fire was out. He thought it was out. So the fire's burning. They're escaping over the roofs, but the maidservant, sadly, we don't even know her name. She was absolutely terrified. She wouldn't jump, and sadly, she did become the first victim of the fire. Luckily, only 6 people are recorded to have died in the fire, and we will talk about a couple of those in part 2.
That's tomorrow.
And but
that's not necessarily as it seems, is it? The 6 people dying.
Indeed. We're pretty sure a lot more than 6 did die, but we do have records of those 6. So more of that in the next episode. So the fire starts to spread. Now, they're not too worried at the beginning, but they think, oh, this isn't looking good. We're going to go and get the mayor. We're going to go and get Thomas Bloodworth.
Which is a great name. It's a fantastic
name. But he's not a great character in our story. He is the mayor of London, and unfortunately, he proves to be rather ineffective. He comes down and he looks at this fire and he thinks, well, I think we could probably put this out pretty quickly. And in fact, he actually is rather rude. He says, pish, a woman could pee it out, or words to that effect.
Something slightly stronger than that, but yeah.
Yes, a little bit stronger than that, exactly. And he pretty much washes his hands of it and goes to bed and doesn't do a huge amount.
Which he will regret, won't he?
Which he's going to regret, and he's going to come up again in our story. Meanwhile, northeast of Pudding Lane is a street called Seething Lane, and in Seething Lane lives a very important character in our story, which is Samuel Peeps.
Now, we've talked about him a few times already, actually, in the last few days, Samuel Peeps. And those who remember, he's a diarist. So he is great because we have so much in history from this era from him, don't we? It's thanks to him that we know, about all the details of the Great Fire and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, he, as you probably already said, 9 years he wrote this extraordinary diary, and it's because of him we know so much. There were other people who recorded the diary, like John Evelyn, a young boy called William Tazwell as well. But Pepys was extraordinary, really, and he wrote his diary in shorthand. In fact, I think I've got a picture of it as well.
Yes. We do. Hang on a sec.
He was an interesting character. He worked for the Naval Board.
There we go.
There you go. Thank you very much. He'd worked his way up through patronage, etc. Very, very, very clever man. And he was writing this diary, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, his maid Jane wakes him up and says, look, Mr. Peeps, look out the window, look, there's a fire. And he looks out and he thinks, well, it's quite far away, it doesn't look too bad, and he actually goes back to bed. However, by 7 o'clock the following morning, this fire has spread. It has spread down Pudding Lane. It has spread down Fish Street, and it has got to London Bridge, and it starts to cross London Bridge. Luckily, there was a break in the middle of the bridge because there had been a previous fire in 1633, and thank goodness that stopped the fire getting over to the south. However,
and we should mention as well that London Bridge at this point in time is the only bridge crossing the River Thames, isn't it? The only other way you can get across is by hiring a boatman to take you across. So London Bridge is literally, it's the main thoroughfare, it's the only way.
That is it. That is it.
So it's a really big deal.
And of course, had it got over there, then a lot of London south of the river would have been burnt as well. But it didn't. But it did burn the water wheels. And this had a big impact because it meant it was much harder to fight the fire because the water supply was affected. So it then gets to the warehouses, and of course the warehouses are full of flammable materials, tar, pitch, hemp, and these just go up in flames. So by this time the east wind is blowing, and it's all blowing to the fire to the west, and by now there is a conflagration. And at this point, 7 o'clock in the morning, Peeps gets up, looks out of the window and goes, oh my goodness, this is serious. So he goes to Tower Hill, he looks at the fire, and he then gets a boat onto the river, and he thinks, we have got to get to the king. So he goes to Whitehall, and he manages to get an audience with the king, and he said, look, everyone was running around crazily. They were almost sort of mesmerized by this fire, and all they could think to do was to try and rescue some of their goods and try and escape. And some of them, if they were lucky, would get onto the river by boat, or some of them were trying to get north to the fields like Moorfields or Spitalfields. They're all trying to get away, but really not a huge amount is done about putting the fire out. And he says to the king, look, what we need to do is we need to start pulling these houses down. And the king says, absolutely fine, go and find the mayor and tell him he has to pull these houses down. So off Peep goes, and Peep finds himself in Cannon Street, and he finds the mayor, and I've got a nice little quote. Here we are. At last met my Lord Mayor in Canning Street, like a man spent with a handkerchief about his neck. To the king's message he cried like a fainting woman, Lord, what can I do? I am spent. People will not obey me. I have been pulling down houses, but the fire overtakes us faster than we can do it. So he left me and I him and walked home, seeing people all almost distracted. So what Bloodworth does is he goes, I am spent, I can't do any more. And
I'm off.
He goes, I'm off, I'm going to go and have a sleep because I can't cope anymore.
I mean, he's really not coming out of this story very well at all, is he?
He doesn't come out
He's
well.
kind of the baddie here,
He's
isn't
a
he?
bit of a baddie. He's a bit of a baddie. Well, he's a big baddie, actually. I mean,
Wait a minute, yes.
had he got onto it straight away, maybe none of this would have happened, you know.
Yeah, history would have looked a bit kinder on him, maybe.
It would have been. Now, actually, to be fair on Bloodworth, he did know that the houses needed to be pulled down. And the way they would pull these houses down were with a fire hook. And I think, thank you, well done, very good.
There you go. Glamorous assistant.
They would pull these, yes, excellent. And these were tall, these houses, about 40 feet tall, obviously, you know, timber framed. And by pulling them down, of course, the idea was to make a break. They were also using leather buckets. We'll talk about them again in a minute if we're at time. Yeah. Oh gosh, we've got it done very quickly.
I know, it does go quickly.
It does go very quickly. So leather buckets, they were squirts, these extraordinary instruments called squirts, and they were pulling them down. So he did know they had to be pulled down, but, you know, he had sort of some very important sort of landowners and property owners who didn't want their houses pulled down. So he was trying to keep people happy at the beginning. Of course, it was a massive mistake.
And of course, you're pulling these houses down, but the streets are tiny, and the houses you're pulling down are wood. So realistically, you're pulling them down, but there's still a pile of flammable stuff there. It's rubble, and in a very, very small space. So whilst you're kind of taking the height away, you're not really taking away any of the material that the fire's
No,
going
it's
to use.
crossing. It's just crossing. It's not till later they realise that literally what they're going to have to do, and we'll talk about this on the next episode, is that they'll need to blow up the houses. So we're going to talk about that. Now, I don't want to sort of go on too much because I know this is a small tea break slot. So what I was going to do is take it to St Paul's, but perhaps we can leave it.
No, I think let's go up to St Paul's. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so what happens now is that night the wind changes directions and it starts to blow north, and the fire is going up north and it's getting towards the financial district, and that's the most sort of the wealthiest part of the city. Lots of people are trying to sort of remove all the wealth, etc. Meanwhile, Samuel Peeps, he is moving all his, oh lovely, thank you. He's moving his stuff to the east, to sort of Bethnal Green, and famously he digs a pit, and he buries in his pit his wine and his Parmesan cheese. So
I mean,
no, he's got his priorities right.
Exactly. I mean, frankly, yeah, we'd all do the same, wouldn't we? Check your cheese and wine. That's what
you've got your Parmesan. Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Your house might burn down, but you can have a lovely wine tasting afterwards.
Yeah, indeed. Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
So it's now spreading. Now, what is happening, interestingly, is that flakes of fire are actually, and you hear the diarists actually record this, that these fire is actually sort of floating over to different parts of London and starting fires independently. And what this means is that people are thinking, this fire has been started deliberately. Mm-hmm. And there starts to be a horrible part of this whole tale is the foreigners who are living in the city, the French and the Dutch particularly, because we were at war with the Dutch at this time. Yeah. They believed it was them who had started the fire and that they were sort of starting these independent fires. And there are some really unpleasant stories.
They sort of become scapegoats, don't they? They get sort of...
Completely. And you hear about these
whole
groups of gangs of women with sticks and gangs of men, and these awful things that were happening to both men and women and all over the city. And in fact, what they were doing in the end was that they started to lock up the foreigners purely for their own protection, and that actually saved some of their lives. So this was all happening. The king and his brother, the Duke of York, who would later go on to become James II. They are actually heroes of the hour because they were fantastic. They came to the city, and the Duke of York particularly, he set up command posts around the city run by other courtiers. And just think, this time was a time of decadence, really. This is this new court, this restoration court. But when it came to the crunch, they were actually very effective in this sort of in this dire catastrophe. And they start to set up command posts, and they're going around with their money, sort of paying them. And then I'm going to just be very quick the next bit. The fire spreads, it goes up Cheapside, the old marketplace.
So Cheapside is, if you look on the map, actually no, I can't pick out Cheapside on that map at all. It's one of the streets, kind of slap bang in the middle, one of the white ones.
Sort of, if I go like that,
east to west.
It's to the east. If you can see some.
It's sort of right, kind of here.
Well done. Sort of, yeah, a bit
sort of there-ish.
Down, yeah. Okay. And anyway, so it spreads down Cheapside. The whole thing is absolute complication, and it gets to St Paul's Cathedral. Now, nobody's worried about St Paul's because it's a stone building.
Huge stone building. Why worry?
Fellas locally, they've put their books in the crypt. It's going to be okay. But is it? And we hear more about that in the next episode.
Oh, what a cliffhanger. So we're going to leave it there on the end of day 3 with the fire raging in London and roaring up towards St Paul's Cathedral. And we're not going to tell you how that ends until Saturday. So you're going to have to wait for that, I'm afraid, everybody. As you can see, there's a lot to talk about, so we're going to go into the rest of it. The end of the fire, what gets destroyed, and then the rebuilding as well. So that is your cliffhanger for today. Can you wait? Oh, the excitement for Saturday. So we'll see Laura back again on Saturday at 3 o'clock. For that tomorrow, I'm going to be heading out and about on my Fridays on foot, going to, I live really close to some of the old docks. We're going to go and have a look at the docks around there. And let's just see if we've got any questions before we go. Jacqueline's saying she loves the poster behind you, Laura. Well, we did discuss what your background was going to be, and we thought the Kings and Queens poster was absolutely perfect for it.
You got to have a Kings and Queens poster.
Nigel Runstrom is sending some fabulous questions, like, does Bruce Willis save us? And he already says that actually he's buried his own cheese today, so well done, Nige. And we've got my friend Janny, who is actually a firefighter in Canada, and was probably on the edge of his seat thinking, I would have sorted that out. Who else have we got? Have we got any other questions? I don't think we do, actually. I think everyone's just... No, I think we're all good. Everyone's loving all the weevils as well. Yeah.
Oh, good. Enjoying their
could definitely be a source of protein for us in these troubled times. So there we go. That's where we're going to leave it for today. Like I say, please go and have a look at my website that I've updated with all the lovely links. And that video that we talked about earlier, the 3D rendition of London prior to the fire, is on there. It is fantastic. It's only about 3 minutes, but it's just brilliant. They've put so much work into it, and I loved watching that. And there's everything on there. And again, thank you to everybody who's donated any money. I'm really, really appreciative. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to say, Laura? Oh, we're going to mention your walks as well. So Laura does walks in conjunction with the Museum of London for Key Stage 1 students. And she does these a lot, don't you? It's one of your big specialties.
This is, it's a fabulous group of guides. They've all been either teachers or in education before. And what we do is we do a walk from the Museum of London for Key Stage 1, they're school children, so they come up, their class comes up, and it really enhances their learning. They love the Great Fire of London. Yeah. So we do the Museum of London, and they will also have the chance to look around the museum, and we do also fantastic walks from the churches, from the city churches, and that gives you an opportunity to do the walk, and also we do lots of activities, dressing up, quill writing, sort of little treasure trails, all sorts. So, yeah.
And Bob says as well, and churches of the Great Fire of London as well, you do.
Yeah,
as another walk,
churches are fascinating, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, on my website, I put the little link for that, so that you can go on and have a look at the Museum of London's website. But you can also email Laura direct for that, so her details are on there as well. Listen, Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you
to everyone for joining as well, and we'll see you back on Saturday for more Great Fire excitement. Yay! Thanks. Thank you so much. All right, bye.